Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have back with us Nina Acosta, who's the founder and CEO of Transcend, the Light, a transformational life coach. And today we will be talking about emotional trigger management. Nina, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
You're welcome. And I guess we should start with, first of all, what is an emotional trigger? Because to manage something, we need to know what it is. So get us started off with that. What is an emotional trigger?
Yeah, that's a great question. An emotional trigger is basically, it can sometimes be physical too, a physical or emotional response to an external factor. And sometimes that response reminds an individual of a traumatic event or negative experience in their life. So a lot of times if you are, quote unquote, triggered, you may feel like you're being blamed for something, or some insecurities, might pop up, like you're being excluded or criticized, which is your internal clock saying, okay, I am triggered. And you're actually being triggered by that external factor instead of actually realizing what's actually going on in that situation.
Yeah, like it might be misinterpreted. You might lash out at something and think, oh, well, that was the cause of it. But in reality, if you dig in deeper, it's because it was something from the past that connected up in your mind like an anchor kind of a thing.
Correct. Yeah. So just a lot of times, I see it a lot of times in my clients in relationships. So they might have a new relationship, right? And they may have had a traumatic experience with their old partner, and so they sometimes bring that into that environment, and then they have to realize that they're actually being triggered, that situation isn't actually happening as they perceive it. And it's a lot of times their brain playing tricks on them.
Yes. And so I guess the question then is, when you have a circumstance like what we were talking about before, is you're aware, you notice that, something's just not right. So I want to be aware of this. How in the world do you figure it out what the source is? Because I would suspect that you have a lot of people that ask you, this triggered me. Yeah, I get it. I check the box and say I'm triggered, but who knows where it came from? That's got to be like a puzzle.
Yeah, it can be sometimes. And it's always important to, obviously talk to a friend or seek professional help or get a coach so they can help you identify that. In the moment, what I usually tell people is because they have the awareness there, they are triggered. And especially if it's an intense emotional response like anger, I usually tell them to implement a pattern interrupt. And that usually, shifts their mind really quick, gets their emotions in check. It brings that awareness to them. And that way they can go and actually figure out where it came from. Some things that some people do are breath work. Breath work usually resets the nervous system. It's a great, fast way to get our bodies in check right away, right? It doesn't have to be like a super integrated process. You just breathe 3 times, and hold the breath and then release. Or just walk away even. That's a good, pattern interrupt as well, is just tell that person, obviously communicate, and say, hey, I need a second to go for a walk, and then.
Anything outside of the normal.
Right. Correct.
Because like a pattern interrupt could be, I wear a rubber band, I'm going to snap my wrist, and that's a pattern interrupt. Or it could be, like you said, like the breathing. So I think that I've said this so many times in various circumstances, but does this apply here? If we pack our lives so tight full of stuff and we're just going busy, going crazy, sometimes we don't give ourselves the time to notice, I'm upset about this, or I'm anxious about this, or I'm being triggered, but you're not even allowing yourself to notice that because you're just off to the next thing. And you're like, I'll deal with that later. So you don't even get to the chance of, let's do a pattern interrupt, and because we're packing our lives so busy.
Correct. And what I always tell people is to implement like some type of anchor for transitioning too as well, right? When you're transitioning from your home in the morning to going to work or from work coming back home, to implement something that is going to be an anchor for them. It can be anything, it can be something really simple that gets their brain to know that they are transitioning into like another role, right? Because you want to let go of everything that you're holding on to, because you're right. Because if you don't transition, if you don't slow down and be present, you're going to bring whatever it is that's affecting you from a situation that happened 15 minutes ago. It could affect what happened 6 hours ago, when you're back home with your family. And you may not even realize it in that moment unless you slow down and be like, okay, where are these feelings coming from, right? Am I really being rejected by my partner?
Yeah. So that's a good example. Let's talk about some examples of emotional triggers. What would that look like, sound like, feel like? And then we're gonna want to some examples without scenarios or whatever. But what are some things that people could be going? Ooh, I probably never would have thought of that as a trigger, but yep, it sure is.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing that comes up often is abandonment in my clients, right? So it can be something as simple as somebody not getting back to them right away, through a text message. They may be like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Do they not like me anymore? That type of thing. And the person on the other end is just busy and they have a lot of stuff going on, right? And they're not even thinking about that, but it's affecting that person. They're like, oh my gosh, they're questioning their friendship. Are we even friends anymore? Or the fact that, if they invite somebody to go somewhere and the person for some reason has to cancel, they may have a sense of rejection, thinking that that person rejected them and all that, but usually the person is just busy. They have, because we all have our own lives, right? So those are some things that I see that come up a lot in my clients, abandonment and rejection, or they think someone's criticizing them. Like we all know at work, sometimes we get these emails, right? And sometimes we're reading in between the lines. Sometimes there is something to read, but sometimes there is not anything to read.
Most of the time there's not, Yes,
right. And we're reading it in our own tone because of how we feel in that state, in that moment. And so we're putting our own connotation to what the email says. Instead of
and if you were to approach that person, let's say in the hallway, and you're like, hey, why were you so snippy in that email? They'd be like, what? And so I think so. Let's think about something in some of these scenarios, like you mentioned, like, oh, this person had to cancel, and now you might feel abandoned because, right? You had something in your past that would have caused that to be connected, and then there's the trigger. So you could say, well, you need to stop feeling that way. When that's a broad statement, I know that's harsh, but there could be that. So I'm not saying this is what you would say, but there's two sides of the equation. That person could say to the other person, when you're my best friend, and I want you to know this moving forward, when you had to cancel, it made me feel like this. And so, hey, the next time something like that comes up, could you just please say it this way or do this? That might be unnecessary because that's putting a lot on the other person. And now this other person has to go, oh my word, I was going to go see a movie with this person next week. And now I've got to do this whole lead in with, oh, you're amazing, but I just feel like, and so where is the balance? I guess that's my point. My question is, where is the balance? Because there should be some give and take on both sides of the equation. Because if someone told me, oh, hey, when you do this, it makes me feel this way, it'd be like, oh, I have no clue. And it might be just an easy thing for me to do. But if it requires me to be doing 9 paragraphs of an introduction conversation or text, and then finally go, oh, and I need to reschedule because that's just a lot to put on that other person, isn't it?
No, I agree. But you also got to look at it like you got to think about how much you value that friendship, right? Mm-hmm. So like if it's something with my best friend and she says, hey, you triggered me when you said this, because I can be very direct sometimes. And I'm like, oh, okay, of course, because I love her. Yeah. She's been my best friend forever. And I want to, and
I had no clue.
We have, a fulfilling, loving, healthy friendship, right?
Yes.
But, and it all depends because if it's a stranger, right, that can be catch you off guard, and you might be like, oh, whoa, I don't know how I want to.
So you might say, okay, note to self, as Nina's telling me as my coach, when you feel a little bit triggered, first before approaching that person, if you want to ask them to do something differently in the future, assess the level of friendship. Like if it's someone you just met and it's like, well, BT dubs, the next time then it's like, what? We just met, but then what if it is a very good or best friend? Now you could easily say to them, hey, look, you know how I've told you in the past that I experienced blah, blah, blah. When you said this way, I know I probably took it was a little sensitive, but if you could just, and I think that the level of the connection in the relationship really is the answer to that question.
Yes, and two, also like the level of the connection too in the relationship. But like if it's a complete stranger, and you don't have to give like a long response like that either, Yeah. Like if it's a good friend, you're just like, hey, I'm just working through some triggers right now, right? Like, yeah. And that's how I felt. But also too, if it's a complete stranger, what I would just do is that's where boundaries come in. Right? So that's where boundaries for yourself, the type of relationships that you want to build with people. So it's kind of like, okay, everybody has their own set of boundaries or they should. It's healthy boundaries, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times people don't, but they should have healthy boundaries on what they will and will not accept. And if that thing or that situation is outside your boundaries, even though you are triggered, then maybe, you can lovingly, energetically space yourself out from that person,
Yeah.
And so you don't have to have that conversation. It's kind of like, okay, this happened more than once. It's happened 3 times. I am going to energetically space myself out. Or if it happened 3 times before you do that, just make sure that it is something that is triggering you internally.
Yeah, because you would know, okay, well, this is a newer friendship / relationship, and this is irking me about whatever. And so maybe you're going to go, okay, I'm just going to put a little, it doesn't mean I hate that person. It just means I'm going to put a little space there. I'm not going to invite them over, 7 days a week in a row, but I'm going to put a little space there. And then if that trigger still kept firing, for whatever reason, if you saw the potential for that relationship, friendship or relationship to move ahead, maybe then you go, hey, just, a little FYI. And I think that that's interesting is sometimes people feel guilty that they have to put some space into a relationship, but there's nothing wrong with that. That's better than having some blow up.
Right, absolutely, because that's one thing you want to avoid for sure. And I know, like, from my past is that, like, that blow up, right? Just go ahead and talk about how you feel if it's a relationship that you do want to salvage and you do value.
So then let's say that you are having these triggers happening. How do you learn to stop being triggered by someone? So, and maybe that entails having a conversation, but could there be some things that you can do yourself to kind of go, okay, this person is just always going to be this way. I just need to condition myself to just, realize that it's the way that they are. So how can you do that within yourself?
Yeah. So if it's somebody that's in your life, I would say, we all have more positive traits, you know what I'm saying? And we have more wounded. Some of us have wounded traits. And so just focus on the more positive traits that they do have, I would say, because a lot of times we always focus on the negative versus what value they bring to the relationship. And, what you focus on is what you're going to see more of. And so it's going to cause you to be more triggered. One thing that I do suggest to my clients, and this does work, is that if you're getting triggered by someone that's in your life, consistently, and there's just like maybe you guys co-parent together or something like that. And so there's different tactics that you can do. There's one that works well, and it's like imagine them, because it's true. If you're getting triggered by somebody, or if they are, just say if there's a confrontation and they're sending you messages or whatever that are like crazy, just imagine them as like, I don't know, a Disney character or something. You know what I'm saying? Like you envision them as a Disney character. I go to Donald Duck because I just envision Donald Duck making his quacking noises. And it really does take away that intense emotion because they're not in a state of being receptive for you to speak to them, but just imagine them in that state. And it might be even maybe a small child, as their smaller self. If you imagine them in that way too, it really takes the emotional response from the situation.
And it just helps you to see it in a different light.
Correct. Yes.
I've heard the example before, not in triggering like we're talking about here, but like what if someone on the road, is like borderline road rage and they're tailgating and they're blowing the horn and then we're going around you and you could feel like, oh, I'm so mad about that. But what if, hypothetically, you found out that person had just gotten a 911 call that their spouse is in, the emergency room. They're just trying to get there. Now, all of a sudden, you would view that situation very differently because it's like, oh, yeah, go, go, go. So not that you would ever know that, but that's the feeling. It's like that scenario. In one case, you're ready to, blow your own horn and tailgate them. But in the other scenario, when you know that information, it's like, oh, yes, I'm compassionate now. So how can you construct that in these situations? Cool idea about the cartoon character.
Yeah, in that situation, road rage and being on the road, I would definitely have to turn on some music, right? Some uplifting music or some music to snap me out of it, because that's how I operate. So it's identifying how you operate, and especially when you're driving, there's not, much that you can do. You can't jump up and down. But if you have something on your wrist, or you can change the radio station to something like, the 80s or whatever that gets you going in that high vibe state, that does help. Or even, if you like Christian music, put on Christian music, like that will help and remind you.
Exactly. I used to do this when it came every month to pay the bills, and you just have that gut-wrenching feeling. And like, I would put on 80s music and go, okay, at least I can feel good while I'm doing something that I don't like. So it really, it's a fact. It is not some woo-woo weirdy thing. It's like, just why not? The runner's high. Well, maybe if you know that you've got a stressful afternoon coming up, go take a quick run and get cleaned up, and now you can handle the so I mean, it's you need to know you. And someone, like when we mentioned 80s music, someone might be irked with that, like, oh, well, I prefer country. Okay, cool, then put that on. Or I don't like Donald Duck. Well, then how about Goofy? And maybe Goofy is the great character because he's just a big goofball and he just is happy-go-lucky. So that's a really interesting admonition. I've even heard of, I think it was, I attribute it to Tony Robbins years ago. I heard a teaching that he did where he was like, if you have this memory that, you can't, it's just really bugging you, replay it in your mind, but put some, like circus music, like clown music in your, and then in your mind, just kind of scratch it out. And so now you're replaying it, but yet it's got a fun vibe to it. And if you don't like clowns, then obviously you would use something different, but you've got to re-anchor that feeling, that trigger, that event with something that you're perceiving as good.
Right, correct. Something that's going to change the way you're feeling instantly. And, even I have at one point in time, I remember way back, I had a boss that was really triggering before I was doing all this work, but I didn't even realize what I was doing. I started singing the Frozen song, like Let It Go, right? Every time I was around this person, I would get so bent out of shape. And I was like, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore. And so I would just play music before I even realized what I was doing. And I would sing that, and then, my staff, they would laugh at me because I would sing, but it was just like, it was uplifting. It was getting me out of that state. And
that was your coping mechanism.
Right.
Okay, so that's a good point. It's one thing to have a brand new friend or a stranger and you confront them. Well, we talked about that. How about your bestie? Okay, we talked about that. What if it's a coworker and even worse, a boss? How in the world do you go approach a boss and go, you triggered me?
Yeah. So
they just show you the door, so you got to be really careful.
No, I know. Some people have to be careful. You do have to be careful what you say and how you say it, and hopefully you guys have established some type of relationship, right? So you can confront them if that's what you're going to do. But it's having just an open conversation. It doesn't have to be, so on a deep level that, hey, you're triggering me because of my dad issues, or you know what I'm saying at work.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that transparent, but you can come across and say it in a way that's professional. Yeah. And most bosses are receptive, but I wouldn't suggest, if it's a heated discussion, I wouldn't suggest bringing it up there. I would suggest and wait where everything calms down and then call a meeting or a lunch or a coffee, whatever resonates, in that environment, and have a discussion with them and put it out there. But it's also going back to yourself, because it's not pointing the finger at somebody else and blaming somebody else for your trigger, right? It's just bringing an awareness to it and maybe giving some clarity on why you reacted the way you reacted.
But as long as it's not in the heat of the moment and in some type of a back and forth argument, that boss should and could go, oh, wow, thank you so much and then maybe that opens up a different level of a relationship to go, hey, well, tell me about yourself and so it really could be like a really open, authentic, transparent, breakthrough in a relationship if you're doing it the right way. And that's boss or no boss. That could be friend. So it could be something where it's like, hey, thank you so much for sharing that. That makes a whole lot of sense.
Right. Yeah. No, you're 100% right. Because a lot of things, and what I've realized in my own life, and then coaching other people too, is just like a lot of these situations could not have blown up if there was just a conversation, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't have to be like a deep conversation. It's like, hey, this really bugged me when you did this, But we don't talk about that. We just kind of like try to push it under the rug, and then it festers and it festers and it festers, and then it comes out in all areas of our life. That one situation is affecting, our home life and our work life. And instead of just talking about it, releasing it, and just acknowledging the emotion too, as an individual.
Yes.
Because a lot of times we try to suppress our feelings and don't acknowledge what we're feeling. And then it keeps arising and it keeps arising. And so if we acknowledge it, that it's there and it's okay, with no judgment or shame that we are feeling that, then we can release that emotion as well.
So let's say that you start learning how to do this within yourself and you start making some progress, and it's never flipping the switch and I'm cured and fine and never going to happen again. We know that it's going to be ebbs and flows. What if you start noticing that in a friend and you start, because sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. So the friend is like getting triggered and upset and frustrated with whatever the situation is, and they aren't able to see it, but you can. How do you help a friend that is being triggered by a situation, scenario, or someone else?
Well, I would, one, acknowledge their situation and what they're going through. Don't say they're over-exaggerating or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like, be a listening ear and acknowledge what they're going through. And just make sure you provide that safe space where they can come to you and talk to you about it, right, with no judgment. And that if you're noticing it, maybe give them a new perspective on how to look at the situation. Maybe give them a new positive perspective on how to look at the situation instead of having them being stuck in their own, mental anguish about being triggered about the same thing. So that's what I would do. Yeah.
That's a great point. And when they can see that you're coming at it from a perspective of, oh, you know what? Like I remember this, one of these like human resources trainer speakers years ago had said, if you're like at the hotel and you work the front desk and there's a angry guest and you don't call up to the boss and say, come down here, we've got a problem. You call up and say, come down here, we have an opportunity. Well, the opportunity is to solve a problem in the right way, make a friend for life, make a, whatever. So in this situation, like with a friend or any of these, it's not necessarily a problem that needs to be solved. It's an opportunity to work through this, issue trigger so that you can alleviate it somewhat or as much as possible and bolster that relationship.
Right. And that's a great thing that you brought that up because, everything is an opportunity, right? And it's just basically how you view the world, because there's some people that view the world that want to see everything negative, and there's the people that view the world that look for opportunities. And so that would be a great way to help them is to really work through their trigger, is look at it as an opportunity, but also, maybe tell them something that you do to work through your triggers.
Yeah.
Maybe share that or share what triggers you and how you work through it. Share your story. And that might help them work through theirs as well.
Because no matter how hard you try, your tone could be misinterpreted, even if you're trying to be the best. And maybe they could be like, well, you're talking down to me. And now you think that but if you were to integrate into that conversation, let me tell you something. I used to have, and I haven't conquered it, but I'm working on it. And here's the way that I've gone through it and been there, done that, and got the T-shirt. My situation was this. It just reminded me of what I noticed there with you, and I was just wondering, would you be open to me providing some feedback that way? Because I know some things that I use might help you out, and then you're positioning yourself on their same level, and not, let me tell you, you measly person that you've got such problems, I can help you fix it. It's like, come on, let me wrap my arms around you, and we can work through this together. That's a really good point.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because no matter what, we can have the best intentions, but somehow, some way, a voice inflection, a raised eyebrow, a whatever, a non-capitalized letter in the text, a capitalized word in the text, who knows what all, the text came through 10 minutes later, 10 minutes sooner. All of those things can be interpreted or misinterpreted. So that's really huge. So yeah, these triggers kind of relate back to some of the things we've talked about in the past, which is being aware, noticing, if you notice something about yourself you don't like, it could be, because of a trigger, what's causing that. So let's go back to that source. So all of those things. And then, and could there be a positive? So how about this? Let's flip it all the way around. What's some examples of positive triggers? So if you're like, hey, every time this happens, or, like we're talking about with the music, can you use positive triggers to then change that state? And I know that we can, but is there a positive side to the word trigger, or is it always a negative?
Well, I tend to use for positive aspects, like when something positive happens, or for example, I remember when I was in sales, if I, got a client, then I would basically anchor that in, that feeling in, with a smell, or I would go, celebrate. So yes, there are, I don't really call them triggers, but there are, it's kind of like the same thing in a positive
like an
way.
anchor.
You're anchoring that emotion, you're anchoring that feeling in on what it feels like. So you can use that same thing to get you back to that state, because that's a whole another conversation, being in that state when you're going to manifest and create what you actually want out of your life is being in that high vibrational state. So anchors are great for that. Music is also an anchor, moving your body and dancing and smells and champagne, whatever, but it has to be authentic to you and what resonates with you as an individual for you to anchor that state of being, so you can actually, when on cue, get back to that state when you need to.
So maybe this is just my impression, and it might be off base, but maybe think of trigger as temporary. Like if you pull a gun trigger, it's a quick little click, and there it is. So maybe that's temporary. Anchor is more heavy, permanent. So let's anchor in the good, and let's use triggers as something that's temporary, and how we can reposition that. So, that way we can move past it and see what's triggering, and hopefully can, view that as a temporary situation that you're working through. So yeah, triggers versus anchors. That's a really great juxtaposition.
Yeah, and I like your analogy too as well. That I feel like trigger is definitely something that you can work through. Obviously there's some little triggers that you can eliminate quickly, but then there's some that are on a deeper level that's going to just take some time. And then they come up on different levels as you grow and evolve. It somehow circles back, and you're like, whoa,
Of course.
Didn't know that was still there.
Bottom line is, we never arrive. No matter what if you talk about spiritual, financial, business-wise, you never, ever arrive. You should always be striving to, incrementally improve and polish here and all of that. And it's just this whole process. So, yay, I fixed this one trigger, which was whatever. Well, now let's move on to the next thing. And that other trigger might creep back. So keep aware. So I think some of these things sound great to listen to, but someone might be going, hey, Nina, I need a little bit of outside guidance because I know that I'm getting triggered, but I have no clue where the source is. How can people reach out and connect with you and maybe learn a little bit more about what you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. They can visit my website. I do have my calendar on there, and it's www.transcendthelight.com. And just click on book a call, and my calendar will pop up. It'll go straight to me, and I'll be more than happy to hop on a call with them.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was a real pleasure talking with you again, and I appreciate your time, Nina.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.